Welcome to the Board of Aldermen special meeting for Thursday, July 30th. We have an agenda in front of us. Do we have a motion to approve the agenda?
So
Mr.
moved.
Gray?
Make a motion, yes.
Second? Okay, any changes or discussion on the agenda? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, then we're just going to go right into the discussion of the federal project. So I'll kick this off, and then I'd ask the others that attended the meeting to please join in as well. We met with Surf City yesterday to discuss the PPA agreement that was sent to both towns to review. The meeting itself, we really just went through the actual agreement, raised concerns so that we could follow back up with them. Neither town felt that agreement that was given to us for review was something that could be executed. There were supporting documentation that was missing from it, as well as none of the financial information was filled in. So I know Kyle had said he had already requested the supporting documentation. There was a couple things that they were when you went through it. One was they called it a decision document. The floodplain management plan was missing that we'd have to create. And then there really wasn't anything about the renourishment efforts from a scope perspective or dollar figure. So we're waiting for all that information back. When in the email for the PPA that came to us, it looked to me like they were pushing for a decision from both towns by August 4th. I don't see how that's possible. I don't believe that we'll have all the information we need back in time. And I've also let them know that our board meeting would be that Thursday, the 6th. So certainly if we have all the information back to even review, we need to have our board meeting to be able to go through it. And we need to get the information and have a few days to review it. It's, so I don't know, Mayor Pro Tem, if you have anything else you want to add, or also Mr. Gilbride, the three of us were at the meeting. And the Attorney Eads, I don't know if he's on the line.
Did you give them any indication of how we seem to?
I restated again that from a town, we do have financial concerns with the commitment that would be required of us. And the other purpose for today's meeting, the next topic would be going through our financial advisory discussion, as well as where we are with the USDA loan. That all plays a part in this project as well.
Was the Corps of Engineers part of this, or was it just
No,
the two towns?
it was just the two towns.
Two towns to get together.
Mhm.
Okay. And where was the attorney on all of these things?
He was included in that meeting. He agreed with the comments and questions that both towns raised, and he added a few additional legal items. And actually, all of that is going to come to the board for review before it gets submitted.
And I'm sorry, who did Tom ask about?
The attorney.
Attorney Eads.
Okay.
The problem with PPA is from the town's point, the non-federal side is, right now the PPA favors the federal government a lot more than it does the town. And there are things in the PPA that say are the responsibility of the non-federal partner, such as surveys of the beach, real estate, and the emergency recovery. We were told in person during a conference call, maybe several of you were on this conference call, that if there were a named storm after the project was constructed, it would be up to the Corps, not FEMA. The Corps would request emergency funding from the Corps budget to restore the damage from the hurricane. Well, it doesn't exactly say that in the PPA, but we were told that verbally. So there are a lot of things that the attorney brought up that, we were told verbally during a meeting, and then the PPA is different. So that's what we're trying to get straight.
Did the PPA address where the funds would come from if we do the project and we have a named storm and we need recovery? Did it address it at all?
Yeah, I don't think it did.
Okay.
We just told verbally it would be the Corps' responsibility because one federal agency can't
Hmm?
pay another federal agency to do a
okay.
project.
Well, I understand that, but I also understand that, that we need to get that one hammered down because, right now, we're getting federal recovery dollars for that area for two previously named storms.
Yeah.
And we didn't have a core project there. And, my thought also is that there's other towns up and down, beach towns up and down our coast in the state that have had federal projects through the Corps, that also have had restoration efforts after named storms. I'm sure Wrightsville did. How did it work out?
I asked about that specifically
Yeah.
yesterday, based on the conversation you and I had. And Kyle sounded like he was very familiar with that effort for Wrightsville, Carolina Beach, and I don't know if it was Curie Beach too. But he said that it was actually New Hanover that paid for that restoration effort because they collect the beach. They basically collect for the beach fund and
Okay.
maintain it at the New Hanover level.
Okay, well, that won't work for us.
No,
We know. Where did their money come from is the next question. Did they get FEMA money?
I don't know.
From, did it flow from FEMA to the state, to the county, to the towns?
there.
Which is how it sometimes does work.
Well, we started talking about the occupancy tax at that point, and I believe that they're collecting the occupancy tax.
Okay.
New Hanover is saving it and putting it in a beach fund.
I'm more
That was
focused-
my
yeah.
understanding. I could be
I
wrong.
was more focused on, I know they must have gotten some Florence money. You think about where Florence came
Oh,
short.
sure, they got some Florence.
So how did, so as I understand it, they didn't get any beach money, FEMA money for their beach from Florence.
That would be true based on the way this is outlined that we reviewed yesterday.
Well, we need to find out,
Okay.
because that's, when you start adding up the pros and cons to this project, that's not a pro.
Yes, sir.
I had some comments, but did you want to add anything?
Well, just the two concerns that I had talked to the attorney about prior to the meeting. One was that there's a provision in there that the federal government can do additional work undefined, and that the local people would be responsible to pay for it. So that's kind of an open-ended thing that would make me nervous. But the other issue that he did bring up, and I'm not sure everyone understands it that well, or everyone at the meeting, but it's the concept of joint and several liability.
Yes.
Where we're liable for the entire project if something happens at Surf City. Now, let's say, for example, they had some massive lawsuit, had to pay out a bunch of money and couldn't meet their obligations under the renourishment or even the original project. We would be obligated to make up the difference and pay that money. It's a scary concept that actually, if I were Surf City, I would probably be a little more concerned about our financial position and them getting stuck with the money, but it didn't seem to resonate really with the folks in the room.
No, and the way we ended that was, I believe both towns had agreed to allow Attorney Eads to draft up something to go as an appendix to our interlocal agreement between the two towns that just says we would not hold each other harmless. Yeah, I mean, we would hold each other harmless, so we won't go after Surf City, they won't go after us. Yes, sir.
Okay, so just a couple of comments. One is, and that was an issue, as you know, I pointed out in my comments on this thing. No offense to our lawyer on that. That doesn't bind the feds, okay?
Right.
Right.
I can make an agreement with one of the members here that we're gonna hold you responsible, okay? That doesn't really hold you responsible. And unless they're a party and they're willing to agree to that, that's a non-starter. I pointed it out before because that is gonna affect our
So you're just saying
finances.
make sure all three
I don't know if
parties
the feds will go
agree.
along with it, but there's a whole lot of things in there. And I think you said at the beginning that, or maybe, I forget who said it, might have been Mike, that this is weighted heavily towards the feds.
Yes, sir.
For example, the fact that they want funds, they want money to their account going back, I think it's to 2011 that they spent on this, okay? I don't know about you guys, but they are the creators of the $500 hammer, right? So the idea that we're gonna have to fund 9 years worth of stuff that they put into us is a non-starter. Second thing is, it also says that we can do in kind. Well, if that's the case and they get 9 years, then we should get 9 years.
Yeah, I don't believe it said we could do the same thing. It said that we would have to start billing after.
Right,
after-
but
right.
it's wishy-washy language.
Well, and that was part of my point, is that they don't like it when you change anything, right? So we had questions about the financing. It was going to be a big deal to ask about it. I believe these items that were brought up yesterday are not going to be taken lightly, and they're going to try and push back and just say, here's the contract. And both towns, I believe, felt that these items were important enough to just say, we're not ready. We're not signing anything until we get answers to all of this.
Right. And I think, and then again, back to what Mr. Gilbride said, I mean, something like joint and several liability, I think the quote of a friend of mine once is, I wouldn't do that for my kids, all right? So I sure wouldn't do it for another town, because that binds us at the hips, and we're not the same town, we don't have the same budgets, okay, all those type of things, and I think.
Or it means we get started and then just, say we don't have any money and then Surf City needs to pay for it.
Yeah, but then we're
I'm
talking,
just
I mean,
kidding.
the whole, no, but I think it's a good point, but the whole thing is, what if one of us goes into receivership?
Yeah.
Because we can't meet those obligations.
Right.
Anyway, bottom line is, I thought, to your point, reviewing that document was very weighted one way, and it wasn't very transparent, because, and I mentioned this to Mr. Gilbride, why don't you guys give us an idea of what these costs are going back to 2011? Why don't you tell us, I mean, if we look at this project and making a number up, it's $100 million, and 30% of it is cost going back for 9 years, then the argument should be, no, we'll look at the 70%, but you're not gonna get that, because they're not just gonna book Bob Smith's time at $15 an hour. Those are overhead charges anyway. But I think the important thing is that we keep the conversations going with them like you've got. But more than anything else is, and I think that's the next item on the agenda, is we don't rush into anything until we know we've got the information that we need.
Agreed.
Well, one of the things, if I could say, my dealings and observations, having been on the Shoreline Protection Commission now, off and on since 2011, and there was a point in time when the Shoreline Protection Commission's pretty much sole function had to do with trying to push forward this project. The chairman was one of the commissioners or board members in Surf City, and they were really pushing hard on this. This was almost all we did, and we'd have Corps of Engineer reps come in on almost every month, and just watching how they work. To your point, they've got a checklist and flow charts, and you can't go to B until you finish A, and there isn't any going to C until you got B done. And then, oh, by the way, this survey that you had was only good for 5 years, so you need to update that because you're at 4 years and 9 months, and that'll be another $100,000. And I'm assuming those are the kinds of charges that we're talking about here that are being revisited back that far. But it's a really frustrating way to do business, and just the manner. And I'm not throwing a rock at the Corps. They got some really good people working down there, and but their model, it's their business model, I guess, that I have concerns with in terms of how they do what they do and how long it takes. And now it's been approved, and it's like, hey, everybody get on a bus. Get on a bus, and we want to shift it in a high gear.
And they've already paid for all those expenses. I mean, those expenses are not just sitting out there. So I don't understand how, because we did not have the luxury of being able to budget for those expenses since 2011. So it is just not the way to do business to drop 2011 expenses on us now.
Well, both towns have already paid several, probably hundreds of thousands of dollars already. Every time they had to do a cost benefit study, we have to kick in money. So we've already contributed quite a bit of cash to
So maybe we just say
project.
that's it.
And I don't see why the Corps would be charging us for their time when we've already paid for their time in these activities, because we've been billed outside of the initial construction costs to
Okay.
get to the point where we are ready to start initial construction. So to really answer your question, we have already paid for all of these projects, and that's why I don't understand why they're trying.
Well,
to
I'm
say
sure like
there's
Tom,
additional
that they have got a
charges.
list somewhere. I'm sure they still have a list.
Right, well, they're tracking this, they have to track,
Yeah, sure. It has to be billed to a project.
Well, not, exactly, my time, I'm working on this project, I have to bill it to the time, they've got, all the details, I'm sure. The question becomes, in something like that, for anybody to even consider it, okay? If the overheads in the project are 50% of the cost of the project, we've got a problem.
Sure.
Right?
And we just
And I
don't have
think-
that level of
right.
detail.
Well, but also I think that, and this was brought up, and I don't mean to, you know, pick on Mr. Benson here, but I remember his reaction when we saw how much the cost had gone up, okay, several months ago. And the surprise with, it's not okay to have something go from, 1x to 5x, and I know it didn't go up that much, but literally, and then the renourishment costs, and those type of things. I mean, it could be the best project in the world, and I think that if you look at just at the engineering and stuff, I'm sure it's spectacular, but it comes down to what can we pay for,
Mhm, sure.
And if we can't afford a Chevy, we gotta buy I used to use Yugo, which shows my age.
Fiat, say Fiat.
Fiat now. All
It's an
right, so-
acronym.
Well, but
and
I
I think we need to discuss that when we get to the next item, which is gonna be about the consultant.
And I think that's really, so I think the point of yesterday is no decision was made. We'll have more information coming our way. We'll have a chance to review it, get back together as a board before we have to do anything there. But I think the next item goes into our ability to even discuss that. So are we good moving on?
Can I add one thing? And I think we're doing it, but as a board, let's just be careful and remind ourselves and agree here to not let ourselves get pushed into making a decision because we're adhering to somebody else's timeline.
Exactly.
Because
It's
at the
an
end of the
arbitrary
day,
timeline.
at the end of the day, we have a responsibility of our citizens in our town. And if it doesn't fit the timeline established and stipulated by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, sorry about that.
Has this contract been implemented in any other projects? Or is this
This is just for the Phase 5 federal project.
I think he's
But-
asking if it's standard operating procedure for the Corps. My
I'm
guess is it
sure
is.
that
It
this
is.
is
It
always
is.
their standard contract.
okay, well,
But
that's what
that-
I'm getting at.
Right, but that doesn't mean that we have to be okay with the terms or conditions in
No,
it.
I
Or
agree,
scope.
100%.
Yeah.
But that nevertheless contributes to the way they're trying to implement it.
Sure.
If it's a standard.
Sure. But I guess I do agree with Alderman Leonard. I feel absolutely no pressure to adhere to any specific guidelines. So if we can't get through some of the showstopper items in that PPA agreement and get to the point where we are comfortable as a board, then we're stuck. That's just,
But we're not out anything yet.
we're not out anything.
We're out the costs that we have incurred and paid for over the course of the development of and planning of the project. And I don't know what those are, but it's not just the one you mentioned, Mike. It slips my mind here, but there are others. There have been other surveys and things that have had to been done all along. And then they all have a shelf life, and they get towards the end, as I said earlier, and you gotta renew them. But the Corps is going to run this, would like to run it, and it's a big deal, I'm sure, for the Wilmington district. It's a big deal
It
to
is.
get this thing
a big deal.
approved, and they're all, but it's going to be a big deal for us if we proceed, and then, well, why don't we have a new fire station? Because we couldn't afford that in a beach.
And then just one final comment, and that is, I think the point you guys are making is, let's not throw good money after bad.
Mhm.
It's one thing to be hundreds of thousands into a project, it's another thing to be committing millions.
Well, and as I said, we don't have enough information. We're not comfortable with the legal document, and we just don't have enough information at this point. So why don't we go ahead and move on to the DEC Associates? And before we get into that, could we spend a little bit of time about talking kind of what kicked this off too, right? With what have we uncovered with our USDA loan, and just I'd like all of us as a board to be on the same page as what are our financial responsibilities as it relates to the repayment of that USDA loan, and where are we?
Well, let me just do one thing real quickly. I did get Mr. Carter to be available on the phone if we needed him very much earlier today. And then just before the meeting, he called me back and explained that because he's a regulated financial advisor to municipalities, there are things that he can't talk about unless he's under contract.
Understand.
So he suggested that we would have to approve his contract prior to him giving us an opinion on the federal project to the extent, or didn't even talk about it. He
Can I
discuss
comment,
his
can I comment
contract.
on that before you leave that?
Sure.
I have no problem with that, because his contract says it's prorated. So if he wants to bill us for an hour out of a $40,000 11-month contract, it's probably $100, Mike. I mean, it's nothing.
Yeah, I don't think it's a major issue, just that he can talk all about his contract, he cannot really give us advice.
But
Right.
can he talk about the note that he sent you? He wasn't under contract for that.
I guess.
I'm putting you on the spot, it's not your call.
And I'm not sure that we need him. Why don't we get into the conversation and see if we feel like we need him?
And the second part of it was in speaking with him, he was the one who came back. They had worked on the whole USDA loan. And you'll remember that the USDA loan was a 30-year loan for almost $17 million to nourish or to engineer the beach in Phase 5, the same area that the federal project is talking about doing. And he said, well, his first question at the time was, why do you want to do a project to put sand on an area where you already put sand? I said, well, not really above my pay grade, the project is out there, it's been approved, this is the situation we're in. And he said, well, it's because of the way the USDA loan was structured with the early payback. Are you in a position to make that early payback, because you're gonna have to pay off the USDA before you can go and get their approval to enter into another project like this. And the whole concept of early payback didn't register, so, I talked to Caitlin, and our agreement with the USDA loan is 30 years. It lays out the payments, it lays out the reserve, it lays out the sinking fund. We are operating under the impression that our obligation is to the USDA to pay off the loan according to those terms. The agreement apparently with the LGC, I guess when you guys came in and proposed taking on this loan to the LGC, perhaps they weren't all that excited about financing sand, and suggested or required or demanded that the town pay off that loan early. I think it was 12 years that they, and supposedly this agreement exists and was negotiated along with Mr. Carter and I guess Mr. Tubman to make this early payment. Well, we have not made any early payment. We, I believe, are right on schedule with what we need to do for the USDA. So this.
When he says it exists, and maybe, Tom, is it a written document?
Well, I was
Well,
gonna ask
that's
that you
the problem.
between us and the LGC.
Right,
Well,
for them to sign off on
Here's the
our
thing.
liability, I would guess.
I'll tell you what I know, if you want me to.
Sure.
At
Please.
this point. I think I was the only one that was on the board when we did this one, okay? And going back even before that, in 2012, we did the inlet realignment. We had to go to the LGC. We had financing established, but you have to go to the LGC because the LGC is basically the state treasury.
Right.
And you get the state treasury to approve what you plan to do in terms of your viability to pay back. We went up there in 11 or 12, whenever it was, we were unanimously approved for what we wanted to do for phase 1. Fast forward to 2014, we get this USDA rural development loan, which was a big deal because ordinarily they're financing wastewater treatment plants and, fire stations, okay, and hard assets, and it was the first time for them to finance a beach project. The loan was for 30 years. We went to the LGC. I don't remember this. Okay, I will tell you now that I do not remember them telling us that we had to pay the loan off earlier than the terms as stipulated by the lender. I do not remember that, and I was at that meeting. And I don't know if there's any documentation in existence that, from the LGC that verifies that, but it's one of those, do you even want to bother to ask? And I will tell you what I did do was after all this bubbled up through the email earlier this week, I called Dan. And I said, hey, do you remember anything about this? And he remembered all of it. That they gave us 11 years to pay the note back. I had no idea. Now, I was on the board and then I was off the board, now I'm back on. But when I was on the board, towards the end of that first that term was when all this took place, okay? And I'll tell you why we did phase 5, just to get it out in the open. At that point in time, the federal project had a likelihood of being approved to the point as a new start. It had been approved, but as approved as a new start and then financed and then obligated. It had the same likelihood of being actually done as the great pumpkin showing up in Halloween at the pumpkin patch. In fact, that was what I always used as the analogy for the federal project. And the only reason I think it came to light was over all the Florence stuff. But I do not remember the issue with the LGC, but it would not surprise me.
I mean, just one point, I think, to what Tom said. Even if there's nothing in writing between us and the LGC, I would make 2 comments, is I understand the LGC and much better than me is, they would probably have to sign off on what we're doing anyway. And so whether it's a written or an unwritten
But why-
agreement.
With phase 5, I don't understand why they'd have to sign off because our financing
taking
for
on
phase
debt.
5,
Because we're taking
You're taking
on
on
the
the debt.
even though it's not through them.
Doesn't matter. It's, if I've got a loan, let me give you an example. If you've got a loan with somebody, unless you're saying that basically you're gonna secure that loan ahead of everybody else,
Mhm,
then
right, I
maybe you
understand
don't
that
have
part.
it. But in terms of like home equity,
Yeah.
you're always behind somebody. My guess is someplace in there, the LGC is gonna say, now you've got so much debt in here, we cannot approve that. You're carrying too much debt for your town.
It's exactly what the evaluation is, and it's not an evaluation. It's you go in to a room about this size up in Raleigh in the state government office. It's a nice big panel room, and there's a long conference table, and all the way around, there's not an empty seat anywhere, but sitting at the head of the table is the state treasurer, okay? There are chairs all the way around the walls, perimeters of the walls, and that's where people like us come in and sit down. And in both cases, it was a manager and a mayor and 1 or more board members. And the first time around, it was Steve Foster, Dan Tuman, Suzanne Graham, myself. The second time, it was Dan Tuman, Stuart Terrell, and myself. And I don't think there was anybody else. And interestingly, on the first go around, there were a couple of people from the south end of town who came to speak out against what we were trying to do, and they didn't get a chance. And one of them, we almost made an alderman, by the way. And then I don't remember if they spoke or not, or if they, I can't remember. But at the end of the day, both times we walked out of there, it was with a unanimous approval for what we wanted to do. But you do have to have, even though, and last time we were borrowing money from the federal government through the USDA, but we still had to get the blessing of the LGC to proceed, basically as Rick described, to ensure that we were capable of paying it back.
So
That makes sense.
let's go back to, if you don't mind, let's go back to any type of documentation. Did we uncover anything on the
No,
from the
actually,
LGC?
and I don't know what documents might be in storage somewhere with the moves, but I have a bunch of old manager files going back to about 2014. And I've gone through every one of them, mostly to learn, but now with this, I had gone back through looking specifically for any information. I found nothing. Caitlin has done the same as Laura. We found nothing in writing. So I then went back to Mr. Carter, who said that he would get me that information and that he had also sent a payment schedule in accordance with that requirement to both the LGC and to us, to the town.
And
at
when
some point.
I did talk with Betsy for a few minutes yesterday, and I think that she was getting with you guys, because she did remember something about we were supposed to save up $4.5 million in our account, make that as a large payment to the LGC, and then something with the sinking fund being able to pay 1 extra payment per year, basically to the point where they were comfortable. I guess doing all of those things would get us to that 11 or 12 year payoff schedule.
It was like prepaying your house loan.
That's not quite
I'm
right.
happy to talk more in detail about that, because I also talked to the
Thank
USDA,
you.
because that's not all accurate.
Okay, perfect.
So she said it was her understanding that it was not verbatim, the 11 years had to be paid off. She said it was as much as possible by that 11-year mark. again, like Mr. Gilbride said, we have found no documentation where this was written anywhere with any communications with the LGC, so I think that would be the next.
Who's the she you're talking about?
Betsy.
we talked about
Okay.
this yesterday. When I don't know, I go to the last source who has had their hands. So there's $4.5 million that is called our sinking fund. That is established that was part of the agreement with the loan for the USDA, and we have that. Part of the agreement was we had to have it saved by the 5-year mark, which we are now at. That sits in our trust accounts, our NCC.
Before you leave that, okay, what is, isn't the total of the loan currently is about 14?
It is a little over 15. I
All
didn't, I
right,
have
so
the balance.
net, we still, if we prepaid the 5, we still owe 10.
Correct.
Go ahead.
But
Sorry, go ahead.
the other thing that it was in this communication, I suppose, was we are not able to pay these reserve funds, reserve or the sinking funds, towards the principal unless it's the last payment.
Oh.
Now that we've saved this up, it has to sit for the life of the loan. So it can go to the final payment, but we're not gonna hit that at that 11-year mark where we're at right now.
Can the sinking fund be decreased as the outstanding balance of the loan is also decreased?
No, it has to sit at
I
that
said before,
$4.5
I thought that was.
$1 million for the life of the loan. Now, we do have the opportunity to draw down on it if there was the case of an emergency like we did in the past with Hurricane Matthew. It has to be approved through the USDA before we can actually do that though. But that is good to know if we got into a scenario like that again, we do have that. And then the FEMA money would then come in, we'd have to put it right back in there because we have to bring it back up to those numbers. Now, the other part of that is the reserve fund, which part of the agreement was you save 10% each year, which for us is $90,000, which is in our budget, gets put every year into this reserve fund. So after 10 years, 2025, we'll hit that and it'll be a full payment, $900,000. So the 4.5 million is essentially the collateral that the USDA has because
That's our
the
hand, that's our
sand-
hard asset.
Right, yeah, because they don't have anything else on us. because
Yeah.
the
Our
sand's
insurance,
gone.
their insurance
Exactly.
policy.
They're lending against cash.
Exactly. And the reserve fund is if we were not able to make a payment for some reason, then they have that reserve fund sitting there, so we have a year's payment to go into effect. So, so I don't have the LGC stuff written down, there, we have no
Well,
documentation.
Let me add some more confusion here if I may. Okay, when you go back and look at the documentation that was signed, the finance officer at the time was a gentleman named Breck Smith, okay? Breck left us, okay? Bonnie took over.
Mhm.
I can't recall Bonnie's last name.
Mhm.
Bonnie was the finance officer when she slipped and fell down the stairs
Mhm.
and she passed away from her injuries.
Yep.
Okay,
Then Betsy came.
then Betsy came, and now we have Caitlin. So we are at we're 4 removed from the person who was really here,
Wow.
who could give us some insight on the financial side of, not that you don't have a good grasp on it, and that's not my point. My point is who was here when the mechanics were being, when the nuts and bolts were being tightened and torqued. Okay.
I'm sorry.
I think maybe I missed something. How did this come to light? How did we find out that there was some agreement?
The note from Carter.
When I was talking to
Okay.
the consultant,
Okay.
who had actually worked with the town at the time, that whole loan was done, and he brought it up, and I didn't
So
know what he was
we-
talking about. you know.
So
We had no
if we
idea.
had chosen a different
Consultant would
consultant,
know.
we wouldn't know anything about it.
Well,
There's a reason not to start over.
but we'd have gone to Raleigh to get this thing approved by the
They didn't know.
LGC, and they'd
They would have smacked us in the
they'd
face.
broke out the handcuffs.
So just another question for Kate, because I'm pretty sure she's run the numbers. You saw the note that I said that there isn't enough money, how much we'd have to pay each year. So using your 5, if we were to theoretically pay this off in 11, how many years have we paid already?
5,
Right, so we'd have to pay off 6 million, I'm sorry, we have to pay off,
15, she said a little over 15 million.
15, and
Oh,
so
yeah.
if you take out.
that's what I'm
what
looking
we
at,
have
when
saved-
Mike and I talked about this, we looked at it and said, well, then we've got no money for anything, if we're bound to something like that. But I think this makes the point, I think that the mayor made before this, unless we get somebody to tell us what's going on, and, like Mr. Carter, that's got the history, I don't know him, but everything that Tom said, and I think you've looked into is, and not to jump ahead, but one of the things that I suggested in this thing is, then we bring on somebody like that. If everybody's comfortable with him, that's fine. But we do it in 2 steps. Okay, first step with him is, and it goes back to this arbitrary deadline when we have to make decisions. Come back to us, not just in a note, but in writing. Here's the things, before you can make an informed decision as a board, here are the things that need to be accomplished. Okay? Check on the LGC, check on the USDA, check on our financial viability, check on that kind of stuff. And come back to us and say, look, because he wants, it's 11-month contract, which I couldn't figure out why he was doing 11 months instead of 12. But my point though is there's no time or anything else. Come back to us with, and frankly, you have to be able to do that in a day, all right, based upon what he says before, and say, here's what you guys need to have done, all right, so that we're sitting here as a board and saying, well, we can't make an educated decision on this thing until we get at least these things. Come back to us with how long you think it's gonna take to at least give us a high level look at that, right? And then the second phase is actually start doing the work for us. But I think the first step is, I would not be comfortable today making a decision, to your point, Mayor, without any information. I mean, my decision today would be no, because I can't even tell if we can get it financed.
And I'd like to know what is the possibility after we have all of the information that we need to digest as a board?
Right.
What is the possibility to be able to go back to the LGC and ask them to work with us, not just for phase 5, but what if we were to get a USDA loan for the fire station? That is a hard asset.
But
I mean,
that's the
would
point.
they
That would be
still say
different.
no?
Right.
So we need to understand exactly to your point, what do we need to
What's our
do?
borrowing power?
Yeah.
Well, that's the, and if I may.
Sorry, Tom.
Okay. We had this discussion well over a year ago. We had tasked the previous manager to get with them and get with Carter and Associates. And it wasn't about the federal project, it was about the fire station. I don't think anybody ever dreamed, again, the great pumpkin scenario, about the federal project, but I've dealt personally with the Carters on 2 occasions. We had to go up with them and sit down and meet, figure out what we needed to do. When you go to the LGC and you use the Carters, they prep you. And they get all your ducks in a row and they get your package put together. And they deal directly with the LGC, and they deal with the LGC on a long-term basis. Their offices are up there. They know how to do that for us. They know our history because we used them to prepare ourselves for 2 trips in front of the treasurer, and to prepare ourselves internally to make sure we could, no kidding, afford to dredge the inlet and put sand on the beach and then to do phase 5. I think if any they're probably the best choice. And I say that because they know our history. We've worked with them before. It may mean some trips to Raleigh, unless you want to pay them to drive down here, which you don't want to do. To your point of the 11-month contract, I wonder if maybe that's not because they're trying to align it to our fiscal year.
Right.
Oh, good
Okay.
point.
But I would like to see my colleague at the end of the table take his discussion and make it into a motion, and I would be happy to second it.
Well, do we need this?
No.
This dollar figure is low enough that we don't need the town attorney?
Question or
Mike's
comment? 2 things. First, it was my intention in asking for, in this case, the Carter's assistance, was for the general fund and being able to finance the fire station. I had no idea that they were gonna focus just on our beach situation. So I think they missed the point of what we were asking them to do, at least from my perspective initially. We wanna know how much we can afford out of the general fund to build a fire station, to finance a fire station. Second point, if we paid Carter Associates $35,000 in 2013, most of us don't know what they really told us. We know some of the end results, but I think we've got to go back and find their report and look at how they based their recommendations and what we did on the report from 2013, in which they're under the last contract with the town. Why would we go and spend more money now for them to tell us the same thing they've already told us 7 years ago? That's my point. I want to see that report from them before we commit to a new financial study for the town.
I think,
And I think it should be limited in scope to probably capital improvements for the fire station.
I think what you're gonna find out is that the 2013 report was associated directly with the Phase 5 project.
Well, that's
I mean, I
fine.
think that's,
That's
and
fine.
I'm just saying, because, you know, again, I think unless Dick was on the board then, I was the only one on the board then. And aside from Deb Hill, the only one associated with the town at that point in time, okay? And what I think you're gonna find is it was work associated with preparation for the following year to get the loan done to do Phase 5.
It wouldn't be
Right,
valid
but-
any longer anyway, no matter what it was for.
But
It's too old.
It would, but it would have gone through all of the town's assets and liabilities to be able to make that determination. That's what I want to see.
Can I just respond?
Yes, sir.
I think both gentlemen have made good points,
Mhm.
right? Here's the issue that I've got. If we decide we just want to have, if we're not going to take a look at our financial viability overall, right? And that's whether it's the beach fund, whether it's capital improvements or whatever, okay, then we're not gonna know what we can and can't spend.
No, I
The
agree, it should be
critical-
all.
The critical issue, right, but the critical issue right now, okay, relates to the project. All right,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that, and with due respect to Mike and I, because we're gonna be working on this capital project, we also sent a note to the town manager saying, we wanna know what your capital needs for what your capital projects are for the next 5 years. We don't have that back yet. It's gonna be hard for this. And if you look at what I sent out, the step one thing with him is simply to take a look, and based upon the note that he sent you before, and based upon discussions you've had with him, he should be able to tell us in a day or two what we have to have, what process we need to go through. That has nothing to do with the rest of what he's trying to do in here. Because I think Mike's right. We've got to have some idea of, can we do a fire station? But my guess is what he's gonna come back and say is, you got this much cash coming in. You can decide you want to use it for this or whatever, but, cash is still king, as they say. That's what you've got, that's what you can take on, all right? And he's got the relationship, Tom, that you described with the LGC and stuff. He's gonna be able to tell us, if you do this, you're not gonna be able to do that. You may
Right.
tell him it's different buckets, but when you look back at financial viability, when you ran your business, right, you couldn't say, well, don't look at that bucket, just look at this bucket. I don't know what he's gonna look at, but I think the process that Mike was talking about is a process we're not gonna get done in a month or two, because it's also gonna depend on what he and I put together with the town, right? What else do we have out there? If the police chief comes back and says he needs this, or I don't know why the fire chief wants to just replace the engines instead of the whole truck.
You already corrected me on that, I know.
All right, well, but again, what else do we have out there that we're gonna have to finance? And how much are trucks? $1 million? All right, so anyway, my point though is, especially because what Mr. Carter is proposing, all right, is a contract that we can cancel with 30 days notice and it's prorated, all right? So the reality of this thing is, if we say it's $4,500 a month, which is what he's charging or whatever, it's a little less than that actually, we're risking $5,000, right?
Mhm.
He comes back to us, and I have no problem with looking at what he did before, but I don't want to leave here without at least attempting to get something in place from somebody so we can start this thing moving now.
My thought is two things. One, first of all, it may take us a month just to find what it was that he did with all of the moving around and the storage and the hurricanes and all that, and he may be able to provide it for us.
Mhm.
Secondary to that, what I agree with Rick, and as what I'm hearing you saying, to summarize, is that we actually have two needs for the services of Carter and Associates. We have the immediate and pressing need of the federal project so that we can get out in front of the roller coaster, the Corps of Engineers roller coaster, so we can make some informed decisions about the future of that project. And secondary to that, we have the need for their services that we've had for well over a year, which was to try to get in front of some planning for long-term requirements for things like the fire station, and what we can afford based on what we've got coming in. It's like, and I think I've used the analogy before, and I know I used the analogy when we talked about getting with them a year or more ago. It's like qualifying for a mortgage. You know, you got this much coming in, you know what your bills are, you know what your expenses are, and you know what your debts are, and what can we do long-term to make the improvements that we all, I think, are in agreement that we need for the town, infrastructure-wise, given the amount of money that we have coming in and the amount of debt we've taken on.
So I think this is probably easy, and I don't even know that we need a motion. I think somebody needs to just direct staff to update this financial agreement to include capital projects as well as the beach nourishment projects, and to also just request that they resend that last deliverable that they provided previously, so we can have an opportunity to at least start there, review it as our baseline, be on the same page that they are moving forward.
With one caveat, and I would leave it to the town manager, please have them describe what the deliverables they're going to give us are. Okay, I mean, to Mike's point.
This can be
it's-
we can add it in
I've
here.
had, no, but I'm just, but generally, when I looked at the document that he had, okay, that is too ambiguous for me.
Okay.
Because I don't need to speak for you. He and I are gonna want specifics in terms of the ability to borrow money for projects, not generally, hey, we think you can do this. It's
So do
gonna
you
be-
want to add something in here that just into the financial advisory agreement? Why don't we just say that, you know, to also provide a list of the deliverables that we can expect to receive?
Yep.
Something as simple as that?
That'd be fine.
Well, I've got step two, I've got undertake the actual work you propose with deliverables, written reports, updates, and a prioritization of the work product, okay? The models he's gonna build, timelines, and look, it doesn't have, you know, he doesn't know, although, to Tom's point, if he's already done stuff for us, and also to Mike's point, if he's done a project for us, he's got some kind of model that he can use for us. He just has to update it with Caitlin to find out what those numbers are.
Well, if I can point out, we've already given him our budget, we've given him the audits, we've given him all the various account
We're
balances.
way ahead of the
So
stuff.
he's got it all.
Okay.
Yeah, prior to.
I'm just asking
Talking
him,
about this, so he should be able to give you that relatively quick answer, and I think he can. As far as the capital requirements, he asked me about the same time you did about the capital requirements, and I answered him and forgot to answer you, so I apologize. But I did give him the firehouse, the police station, and the terminal groin as possibles come out, as well as the federal project. I didn't get too far into the vehicles. I believe the fire trucks were more than 5 years out, although Caitlin and I have talked about setting up a capital reserve for those trucks based on Chad's estimate of what they were gonna cost. But I can certainly add that in.
hey, Dave, the only thing I would ask is, if you saw my step one of this thing, okay, he ought to be, honestly, I mean, if he's got any history with us, he ought to be able to get back to us in a couple of days, because right now, to your point, Mayor, we've got this artificial deadline, we're supposed to be signing stuff. If he comes back to us and says, you can't even make an informed decision without this stuff, then it's easy for us to say we can't make a decision, right? Because, I mean, I would vote against anything today about spending money on something when I don't know how much it costs and whether we can afford it. I mean, you know, that's not a good process to go through.
So Clark, Laura, do we need to make a motion, or do we just need to direct staff?
If you're just directing staff to go back to the consultant to fix and bring a new contract back.
And hire 'em.
Well, I think that's the thing. So if one of you guys want to adjust the request to direct staff, I think we just need to add to go ahead and sign the contract. Just make the modifications.
Under terms that the manager finds acceptable.
No, we've got to run this contract by our town attorney.
Okay.
That's fine, in consultation with
That's
the town
fine.
attorney.
I mean, that's standard. I mean,
Yeah.
it would be following whatever his normal process and procedures
The
are.
town attorney then would say, okay, this is a good contract, the town manager can sign.
My only point being, he doesn't need to come back to us and ask for approval then to sign it. If the town attorney, if he gets it updated, town attorney signs off on the language. We've just directed him on what we needed it to say. He has the authority based on this dollar figure to be able to sign it.
With the
So
approval.
we don't need to look at it or something?
I trust Mr. Gilbride, we can send it back out, but I also don't want to hold this thing up.
Time is the essence here. What I don't want to see us do is drag this thing around to where it's an agenda item for next week.
Well, to be honest with you,
Already approved.
I would like to have the letter back from Mr. Carter before we have the meeting next week, which is why I put it.
I think that if we, and I'm in favor of doing this, but I think that if it's a $45,000 contract, it's gonna be a $45,000 contract. He's not gonna give us the answer we need in 2 weeks. We're gonna say, oh, well, we don't need anything else. That's all we want. He's gonna want the full amount for his opinion.
But that's not the way we wrote it. It's cancelable under 30 days notice and it's prorated. Okay, that's his language, not ours. All I'm saying is that,
It's also 2 payments, isn't it?
Yeah.
yeah, you do half up front. No, my point though is,
Yes, yeah.
I agree with you. Have the town attorney take a look at it, Laura as well. I don't think it's gonna be that. My guess is you got the old contract someplace, right? And maybe each signed off on it, but.
We do. We've seen the whole contract.
Oh, I think I gave you the copies of that.
Yeah,
each other.
okay.
So it's virtually identical, right?
It was 35,000.
So, but basically the changes we're asking for would be to expand it to include the capital projects, resend us the deliverables from the last time he did them for us, and also add some language in here, to your point, Mr. Grant, about the deliverables and timeframes and milestones that we can
And you
expect.
get to step one then, which is just basically,
But that doesn't need to go in here, does it?
no, I'm just saying with him. But that one of the deliverables is get back to us with a list of things we need to do before we can approve a major project like that. Because my guess is that's gonna be a list for any kind of major project we need, sure.
And I still want to revisit this. So what would the normal process be? So if you added those items to it, then it goes to, or he adds it and resends it to you, you're comfortable with it, goes to Attorney Eads. When it comes back, in theory, you have the ability to just execute that contract without coming back to the board, correct? So what I'm saying is if we have to come all the way back to the board, like, I believe we should let Mr. Gilbride do his job. Okay.
What is your spending authority, 45, 50?
I think it's 40.
It's 40.
45 split in 2 pieces.
Well, no, his signing limit, the town manager's signing limit, he asked.
It's
Right.
45, 40.
I believe it's 40.
All right, then make
And
it
this one's
39
25.
and make it a month shorter.
Well, I mean, if it needs to come back, whatever the normal process is, please just let us know and, we'll- you
Well,
know.
let me just ask one quick question. Caitlin, can we, I should ask Laura this. Can the board give him the authority, one-time authority to sign a contract like this up to $45,000?
I would think that if we do, if Attorney says that the
Is
board
he on the
has
phone,
approved it,
Attorney?
we'll do a vote by
By email?
email.
I think you have a couple of options. I think you can give the town manager, we could do a formal vote, and you could give him approval contingent upon.
Those items.
That's what I was gonna ask.
You could also do, sometimes we tend to ratify, the attorney doesn't love it when we do this, but we can.
He's not here.
He's not, we can do a poll by email, once Mr. Gilbride gets the official terms, he could resend it out, we can do a poll, and I can put it in your packet, and you can ratify at the next meeting.
Let's go. I like the first option.
Yeah,
Yeah, me too.
So we need a
More
motion?
Do a
expeditious.
motion.
Yeah.
list out
The issue here is expediency.
So we need a
To some
motion.
degree.
I still move what Laura just explained.
I second.
Laura,
Wait-
can
wait a
you
minute
take
now.
votes?
I think you explained 2 things, which are.
The first one, I'm sorry.
The first one would be to give the authority to Mr. Gilbride by a motion and a vote to be able to execute this contract with the discussed changes that we've requested,
And the
And
approval
the-
of the contract terms by the town attorney.
certainly.
That's your motion?
Yes.
Laura,
What if
could you
it
call
comes
roll?
back 50,000 or something, after we make?
Well,
the-
we can add that to the motion. So do we have a second? Because then we can
I
discuss.
think
He just
Yeah, I
tendered a
already-
contract for 45,000. Why don't we just give him the approval to sign it?
Mr. Peters' comment
I
was
agree
if
with
we
you.
make the changes, if we modify this at all, if it comes to a different dollar figure. So do we want to, in the motion, you could just say approve the contract up to X amount of dollars. We've done that before as well.
I don't think he's gonna come back with a bigger number, because we're not really asking for much. But
No, it's
if you
more
wanna give him-
clarification.
But if you wanna give him 50,000 instead of 45, give him the authority.
Do we have a second?
I'll second that. I thought
Okay.
Susan seconded.
Did you already second?
Yeah, I did.
Sorry.
But it wasn't with the extra money in it. I mean, we modified the,
Right, no, it's not that we're approving 45,000, what we're saying is, if he comes back and he wants to, because of things we've added,
right, I get
right,
that.
then give Dave the authority to say, yes, I got another 5,000 in value, but put a cap on it, rather than just giving him unlimited authority
I agree. I just think it needs to be,
in the record.
the motion needs to be modified to include that.
Okay, that's fine.
And
Is
I
what
believe-
What I mean.
Would you still second it then?
I would
All
still
right.
second it.
Okay, and I think Alderman Leonard seconded with the additional funds as well. So clerk, could you call roll? First of all, does everybody understand the motion? Okay, could you call roll?
Sure, we have to. Alderman Meyer,
Yes.
Alderman Peters,
But right now, no.
okay. Alderman Grant,
Yes,
Mayor Pro Tem,
Aye.
Alderman Leonard.
Yes,
I have a concern about the cost. Is this a prudent expenditure for $45,000?
Well, I think what we're talking about, Mr. Peters, is if we don't have somebody come in and be able to help us understand what our requirements and commitment is to the LGC, to the USDA loan, we're not sure what we financially can do with all of these items that we've got to look and plan to do, like the
understand that.
project. So if we don't spend the money and have somebody help us, we're going to have this same conversation every month.
short answer to your question is yes. Yes, it is prudent.
Okay. Then I'll throw my concern here is in the light of continuing with phase 5, the core project, federal project,
Motion's carried.
it seems to be that the attitudes and concerns thrown up is something that we aren't really seriously going to enter into.
I would say that we are still seriously considering the Phase 5 project, that we don't have enough information as a board to be able to say that we can or cannot do it.
Mr. Peters, when I spoke to him, originally when we were talking to him, I gave him all the information on the federal project and others. When we spoke yesterday, I told him that, in my opinion, we were unlikely to be going through the whole process with the federal project, and would the contract then be adjusted down?
Okay.
And he indicated that it would, but he wanted to leave it in there until we knew what we were going to do.
Okay, that sheds a totally new light on it as far as I'm
Yes.
concerned.
Yeah, because I don't want to pay a whole bunch extra for
Exactly,
work that's not
Picture
done.
anyway.
exactly. Okay.
Okay, you feel better?
I
So,
can change my
okay.
vote or?
Well, I think it's still passed. We're okay.
Yeah, okay, good.
Technical point, he can change his vote
He
until
can.
you announce the decision. So
Okay.
he can go ahead and change his vote.
Got that, Mark?
Got it.
All right, you've changed your vote.
Thank you.
Welcome. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor?
Are you on schedule?
We're on schedule.
That's what I assumed you had
1 hour.
allocated an hour for.
Well, we're trying to get better about being on